The stars above Velhari Prime had never looked so cold. Elder Thesavin stood at the crystalline observation tower of the Grand Conclave, her 4 translucent wings folded tight against her back, her bioluminescent skin dimmed to the pale gray of morning. Below her, the capital city of Ethanvara glittered with soft violet light, millions of Velhari going about their evening rituals, singing their harmonic prayers, unaware that somewhere beyond the 4th moon, metal behemoths were cutting through the dark. She had seen the Keth before. Everyone had. They came to the outer colonies first, always the outer colonies. They arrived without warning, without diplomacy, without mercy. They took what they wanted: resources, territory, labor. They cataloged species the way a collector pins butterflies, with clinical detachment and absolute indifference to suffering. The Velhari had spent 30 years trying to negotiate, to reason, to appeal to something resembling conscience in the Dominion's leadership. 30 years of carefully worded transmissions, 30 years of silence in return. Tonight, the silence had a different quality. Her aide, young Faravin, rushed up the tower steps, his wings beating with barely contained panic. He pressed a data crystal into her hands. She touched it with 2 fingers, and the information bloomed directly into her consciousness. That was the Velhari way. No screens, no intermediaries, pure, unfiltered knowing. What she felt nearly broke her. 40 Keth warships had entered the system 40 minutes ago. No declaration, no communication. They were already in high orbit above the outer colony of Myersh. Myersh had a population of 600,000. The Keth fleet had targeted their power grid with the casual efficiency of someone swatting an insect. Thesavin closed her eyes. She thought of the humans. 11 years ago, an Earth vessel, clunky, noisy, almost charmingly primitive by galactic standards, had wandered too close to Velhari space and nearly caused a diplomatic incident before anyone realized they were simply lost. The crew had been terrified, fascinating, and utterly disarming in equal measure. Their captain, a broad-shouldered woman from a place called Lagos, had sat across from the Elder Council and said something that no representative of any other species had ever said. "If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call us, we'll come." The Velhari had smiled politely. They had assumed it was human hyperbole. Now Thesavin walked to the deep signal array herself. She would not delegate this. Her fingers moved across the frequency keys with the practiced grace of someone who had spent a century in diplomacy. She composed the message in 3 languages, Velhari, Dominion Standard, and the rough, blunt English she had spent a decade quietly studying. She kept it simple. Simple was all she had time for. "They are killing us. We are alone, please. Earth, if anyone hears this, they are killing us." She pressed send. The signal burned outward at the speed of light, carrying her voice across 11 light-years of empty, indifferent space. Then she went back to the window and watched the Keth ships take position above Ethanvara. She did not know if anyone would hear her. She did not know that 11 light-years away, humanity had spent 30 years building something specifically for this moment. Not because they knew about the Velhari, not because they had planned for this exact crisis, but because humans, as a species, had learned long ago that the universe did not reward the unprepared. She did not know that the message would arrive on a Tuesday. She did not know what Tuesdays meant to humans. She would later learn that Tuesday was apparently when Earth made its most important decisions. The signing of certain treaties, the launch of certain missions, the beginning of certain wars. History, it turned out, had a fondness for Tuesdays. The Keth Dominion had spent decades building a detailed registry of what they called category classifications, a ruthless taxonomy of every sentient species they had encountered. Category 5 meant peer-level threat, engage with caution, negotiate from strength. Category 1 meant manageable resistance, expect casualties but proceed. Category 0 meant irrelevant, send a mid-tier fleet, mop up, move on. Earth was Category 0, had been since first contact observation 40 years prior. The Dominion's scouts had watched a species barely capable of leaving their own gravity well, still burning fossil fuels in some regions, still arguing about imaginary lines drawn on their own single planet. Category 0. The Keth occupation commander, Vrethsa, had actually complained about the assignment. 40 ships for a Category 0 species. He had written a formal memo, 3 pages of efficient Dominion script, arguing that 10 ships were more than sufficient for the Velhari. His superiors had given him 40 anyway. Protocol, they said. Vrethsa did not know about the humans. Nobody in the Dominion thought to warn him about the humans. Nobody in the Dominion thought the humans were worth warning anyone about. The deep signal station on Ganymede never slept. It couldn't. The station ran on rotating shifts of 12 analysts, 3 AI monitoring systems, and one very tired station director named Corporal Adiz Enwafer, who had been on her 14th consecutive hour of duty, when the anomaly hit the board at 3:47 a.m., Jupiter Standard Time. She almost missed it. The signal was buried under 17 layers of cosmic background radiation, partially shredded by a solar event near the Kepler belt, and encoded in a language her systems had only a 34% confidence in parsing. Most analysts would have flagged it for the morning team and gone to get coffee. Adiz Enwafer was not most analysts. She had grown up in Enugu, the daughter of a radio operator father who had taught her that the most important signals were always the ones that didn't want to be heard. She put on her headset and listened manually. For 41 minutes she heard nothing but noise, pulsar rhythms, hydrogen line interference, the ghost static of a dying star 300 light-years beyond the source. Then, at the 42nd minute, buried so deep she felt it more than heard it, came a voice. Not human, definitely not human. The phonemes were wrong, the harmonic layering was alien, but the translation matrix caught the pattern of distress that transcends species, that exists in the cry of every living thing that has ever needed help and found itself alone. They are killing us, we are alone. Adiz Enwafer sat very still for exactly 4 seconds. Then she picked up her direct line to UEDC command and said 7 words that would later be carved into the base of the memorial at Velhari Prime. Director, I need you to hear this. The signal reached the UN Security Council chamber in Geneva at 9:23 a.m. local time. The chamber, normally a theater of careful political performance, went absolutely quiet when the translation played. Not the polished diplomatic translation, the raw one. The one with the fear still in it. Secretary General Amara Diallo sat at the head of the table and did not speak for 90 seconds, which was a record. Then she said, "Get me Admiral Osei Mensah." Fleet Admiral Yara Osei Mensah was in the middle of a tactical simulation aboard UEDS Relentless when the call came through. She was 53 years old, built like someone had engineered a human being specifically for the purpose of making difficult decisions under impossible pressure. She had spent 22 years in the United Earth Defense Command, rising through ranks that had never been held by someone who looked like her, from a continent that history had spent centuries treating as an afterthought. She had a reputation among her officers for 2 things, absolute fairness and absolute ferocity. She listened to the Velhari transmission once. Just once, her expression didn't change. Her hands were perfectly still. When it finished, she said, "How long ago was this sent?" 11 years, Admiral. Lightspeed delay. She nodded slowly. 11 years. Whatever was happening to the Velhari had been happening for 11 years before Earth even heard about it. That thought settled into her chest like a stone. What's the status of the Velhari system? Current intelligence? Unknown, Admiral. We have no active probes in that sector. Last passive observation was 8 years ago. They were intact. Population approximately 2 billion, peaceful governance structure, no militarization. She stood up. Get me a secure line to every fleet commander and the Joint Earth Council, Priority Omega, and get Dr. Sato and the Xenolinguistics team on the translation. I want every word of that message verified within the hour. The communications officer hesitated. Admiral, Priority Omega hasn't been invoked since. I know when it was last invoked. Her voice was quiet. That was always when it was most serious. Do it. In the hours that followed, the message moved through Earth's military and political infrastructure like a current through water, inevitable, unstoppable, finding every crack. By noon, every fleet commander had been briefed. By 3 p.m., the full Joint Earth Council was convened in emergency session. By 6 p.m., the Xenolinguistics team had confirmed the translation with 99.7% certainty and added one detail the initial parsing had missed. A name, at the very end of the signal, almost destroyed by interference. A name that the Velhari contact records confirmed belonged to a senior elder. Someone who had met humans before. Someone who had, apparently, remembered them. Someone who had chosen, above all other options, to call Earth. Admiral Osei Mensah read the confirmed transcript one more time, alone in her quarters aboard Relentless, the lights of Earth's orbital stations blinking slowly outside her viewport. She thought about a species she had never met, reaching across 11 light-years of darkness to call a people they had met once, briefly, and still somehow trusted. She thought about what that said about humans. She thought about what it would say about humans if they didn't answer. She closed the file. She opened a new one. She began to write the operational order that would set 300 warships in motion. At the top of the document, in the field marked Mission Designation, she typed 4 words. Operation. We hear you. Most of the galaxy had no idea the Aegis Armada existed. That was, in many ways, the point. The project had been born 31 years ago in a classified annex of the UEDC Strategic Planning Division, under a directive so restricted that even most 4-star admirals didn't know its full scope. It had no official name for its first 7 years. The budget was distributed across 11 different line items in the Earth Defense Appropriations Bill, disguised as infrastructure projects, deep space survey missions, and somewhat brilliantly, an ongoing asteroid mining initiative that was entirely real and entirely legitimate, and also happened to produce the raw materials for the most sophisticated warship construction program in human history. The man who had conceived it was a retired general named Emeka Ademi, who had spent 40 years studying every conflict humanity had ever documented and arrived at a conclusion that disturbed him deeply. Humans were very, very good at war. Better than they should be. Better than almost any species had any right to be. And now they were in a galaxy where they knew almost nothing about who else was out there or what those others were capable of. We have 2 choices, he had written in the original proposal, now declassified and displayed in the UEDC War College. We can disarm and hope the universe is kind, or we can build something so formidable that the universe thinks twice before being unkind. I have studied history. I do not recommend hopping. The Council had approved the program 6 weeks later. What followed was 30 years of quiet, disciplined, extraordinary work. The shipyards were built inside hollowed-out asteroids in the outer belt, invisible to casual observation, shielded against deep scan frequencies that Earth's own intelligence teams had reverse-engineered from intercepted alien technology. The engineers who worked there signed lifetime non-disclosure agreements and lived in rotating 6-month shifts. They were the best humanity had to offer. Propulsion physicists, weapons designers, structural engineers, AI architects, tacticians who had spent careers studying how wars were fought and, more importantly, how they were won. Flagship was UEDS Relentless, 4 kilometers long, powered by a contained antimatter reaction that could sustain maximum thrust for 60 days without refueling. Armed with 16 primary antimatter lances capable of sustained firing at ranges that exceeded most known species sensor horizons. Flanked by 240-point defense emplacements so precisely calibrated that the targeting AI could track and intercept incoming projectiles moving at 1/3 the speed of light. Carrying a complement of 40,000 crew, 12,000 Marines, and a drone bay that held, depending on mission configuration, between 800,000 and 2 million autonomous combat drones. Relentless was not the most powerful ship in the Armada. She was the command vessel. She was built to be survivable, not invincible. The most powerful ships were the Hammer-class dreadnoughts, 8 of them, each bristling with railgun batteries that could accelerate a 1-ton tungsten rod to 4% of light speed. In practical terms, that meant each projectile carried the kinetic energy of a small nuclear weapon. The railguns were silent in vacuum. No flash, no sound, no warning. Just a hole where a ship used to be. Beyond the Hammer class were the strike cruisers, 70 of them designed for speed and precision. The escort destroyers, the electronic warfare vessels that could blind an enemy fleet's sensors so completely that they might as well be fighting in a cave. The logistics ships that could refuel and rearm the entire Armada mid-operation. The medical frigates, the troop carriers. 312 ships in total, crewed by 460,000 human beings from every nation on Earth, speaking 47 different languages, unified by a command structure so rigorously trained that they functioned as a single organism. They had never fired a shot in anger. They had trained for 30 years for the moment when they would have to. And here in the briefing rooms and tactical centers of those vessels, something important needs to be understood about the human beings who made up the Aegis Armada. They were not warmongers. They were not looking for a fight. The psychological screening for Armada service was the most rigorous selection process in human history, not just physical and intellectual, but moral. The UEDC wanted people who would fight ferociously when required and stop the instant they weren't. People who understood the difference between necessary force and cruelty. People who had the discipline to win a war without becoming the thing they were fighting against. They had trained for the enemy outside. They had also trained to remain human while fighting them. That balance, that very human, very difficult, very important balance, was Admiral Osai-Mensah's greatest concern as she walked the corridors of relentless 3 days after receiving the Velhari signal. She stopped at viewports. She spoke with crew members. She ate in the enlisted mess and listened more than she talked. She was taking the temperature of her people. What she found satisfied her. They were ready, they were serious. They were afraid in the way that competent people are afraid, not paralyzed by it, but sharpened. She returned to her command deck and gave the order she had been building toward for 3 decades. All Armada vessels, this is Admiral Osai-Mensah, prepare for departure. Destination Velhari Prime, we leave in 6 hours. Across 312 ships, 460,000 people began to move with quiet, absolute, devastating purpose. The Joint Earth Council chamber had seen many historic moments. The ratification of the Unified Earth Charter, the declaration of First Contact Protocols, the establishment of the UEDC itself, born out of the terrifying realization that humanity was no longer alone in a universe it barely understood. But the session convened on that Wednesday morning, emergency classification, full council, no press, had a different energy, something heavier, something that pressed against the room's high ceilings and refused to dissipate. Admiral Yara Osai-Mensah stood at the center podium in her dress uniform, which she wore perhaps twice a year and always found slightly uncomfortable. She was not a ceremony person. She was a work person. But this required ceremony because ceremony was how humans marked the weight of things. She looked out at the 193 representatives and said, "The Velhari called out to us 11 years ago. We heard them 11 days ago. Whatever is happening to them, whatever the Keth Dominion is doing in that system right now, has been happening while we've been here, comfortable and safe, unaware. I want you to sit with that for a moment before we discuss anything else." The room sat with it. The Aegis Armada is fueled, armed, crewed, and ready to depart. I have operational plans prepared for 3 different engagement scenarios depending on what we find when we arrive. I'm not here to ask your permission to go. A murmur moved through the chamber. She let it run its course. I am here because you deserve to know. Because 460,000 of your citizens are about to cross the galaxy for a people they've never met, and you deserve to look those citizens in the eye, figuratively, and tell them why. Representative Chen Jianwei of the East Asian Alliance raised his hand. He was a careful man, a measured man, the kind of man who had spent 40 years threading needles in international diplomacy. Admiral, with respect, we have no treaty obligations to the Velhari. We have no formal alliance. We have no legal framework that compels. Councilman, her voice was quiet. A child doesn't need a legal framework to call for help when someone is hurting them, and we don't need one to answer. Another murmur, louder this time. Representative Fatima al-Rashidi of the Arabian Coalition stood. Admiral, I want to be clear that I support this action. But I think the Council deserves to hear it stated plainly. Are you prepared for the possibility that the Keth Dominion retaliates against Earth itself? Yes, no hesitation. They will see the Armada and make a choice. If they choose wisely, no one else gets hurt. If they choose poorly, she paused. Earth is not undefended, and the Keth Dominion will learn something important either way. The debate that followed lasted 3 hours. It was genuine debate, heated, principled, occasionally brilliant. There were real concerns raised, about escalation, about Earth's diplomatic standing in the wider galactic community, about the precedent being set. Admiral Osai-Mensah answered every question directly and without evasion. She did not minimize the risks. She did not oversell the certainty of success. What she did do, near the end, was stand very still and say something that silenced the room completely. Every person on this council knows what it felt like to need help and not know if it was coming. Every person in this room comes from a history. Every nation on Earth has a history of moments where someone reached out and no one answered. We have spent centuries trying to become something better than what we were. Something more than a species that ignores the suffering of others because it's inconvenient, or distant, or complicated. She picked up the data pad on the podium. On it was the original Velhari transmission, the raw version, the one with the fear still in it. This is who we are now. This is the test. Not military capability, we have plenty of that. The test is whether we show up. She set the pad down. We are going, every single one of us. The only question before this council is whether history records that you sent us or that we went without you. The vote was 187 to 6. 6 hours later, the people of Earth watched the night sky do something it had never done before. 312 warships broke orbit in coordinated formation, not scattered, not staggered, but together, perfectly spaced, moving as one body with one purpose. The light of their engines turned the dark side of Earth briefly, achingly bright. In Lagos, a retired radio operator named Chukwu Enwafer stood on his roof and watched the light trail across the sky. He did not know his daughter had been the one to find the signal. He would find out later. For now, he simply watched the ships go and felt something that no translator in any language had a perfect word for, that specific human feeling of being proud of your species and afraid for them and grateful all at once. He stayed on the roof until the last light faded. The stars looked different after that. Closer somehow, less indifferent. 19 days in deep FTL was a long time to think. For 460,000 people hurtling through the dark at speeds that made conventional physics politely excuse itself from the conversation, 19 days was enough time to write letters home, to run simulations until the results were memorized, to lie in bunks staring at ceiling plates and wonder whether what waited at the end of the jump was survivable. Admiral Osai had planned for every one of those 19 days. Day 1 through 3, technical readiness. Every system on every ship verified, tested, redundancy checked. The Armada's technical corps, 40,000 engineers and specialists, went through their vessels with the focused attention of people who understood that in combat, the difference between a working relay and a burned one was the difference between coming home and not. Day 4 through 7, tactical immersion. Every crew member at every station, from the relentless bridge officers to the drone controller ensigns on the escort destroyers, ran combat simulations 6 hours a day. Not the same simulation, Admiral Osai had her tactical AI generate 300 unique engagement scenarios, each one tailored to different variables in what they might find at Velhari Prime. Some scenarios they won easily. Others, the ones she had quietly designated nightmare configurations, were brutal and unforgiving and ended with catastrophic losses. She made those mandatory viewing for all senior officers. "I want you uncomfortable," she told her command staff during a briefing on day 5. "I want you to have already felt the weight of worst-case outcomes so that if they start unfolding in real time, you're not discovering a new feeling. You're managing a familiar one." Commander Hiroshi Tanaka, her tactical officer, had asked the question everyone was thinking. "Do you believe worst case is likely, Admiral?" She had considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "No, based on Dominion fleet positioning, engagement doctrine, and the force disparity they'll face, I expect them to break within the first hour." She paused. "But I've been in enough rooms where everyone believed the comfortable thing and watched it become the terrible thing, so we prepare for the terrible thing, thoroughly." Day 8 through 12, the quieter work. Chaplains moved through the ships, every faith, every tradition, because the UEDC had long ago understood that spiritual well-being was operational readiness by another name. Medical teams ran wellness checks. The ship's counselors, often teased in peacetime, deeply valued in moments like this, were booked solid around the clock. Admiral Osai personally walked through 3 different vessel crew sections each day, not to inspect but to be present, to be seen. To be the evidence that leadership knew what it was asking, and was asking it alongside them. She also spent 2 hours each day in the Xenology suite, reviewing everything Earth knew about the Velhari. It wasn't much. A single first contact encounter 11 years ago, cultural transmission data, biological surveys. Dr. Priya Sato, Earth's leading xenolinguist and the woman who had led the Velhari translation team, was aboard Relentless and had assembled every piece of information into a detailed briefing packet. What it revealed was a species of extraordinary gentleness. The Velhari had no word for war in their original language. The concept had been borrowed from contact with other species and sat awkwardly in their linguistic framework. They were telepathic, capable of sharing emotional states directly, and their entire social architecture was built around the principle of collective feeling. When one Velhari suffered, those near them felt it literally, not metaphorically, physically. Sci-Fi thought about that. An entire species that could not look away from suffering because they felt it as their own. She thought about what 30 years of Keth occupation must have felt like for them. It made her jaw set in a particular way that her staff had learned to recognize. On day 13, long-range passive sensors picked up something extraordinary, a Velhari subspace frequency, faint, clearly underground transmission still broadcasting. Someone was alive down there. Someone was still trying to be heard. The signal was too degraded to decode, but the pattern was unmistakably Velhari, the harmonic layering, the emotional frequency modulation. Dr. Sato listened to it for 6 hours straight. When she came out of the audio suite, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "They're still there, Admiral. They're still transmitting. They haven't given up." Sci-Fi nodded once. She didn't trust herself to say much. "Then we'd better not either." Day 17 arrived like a held breath finally released. Long-range sensors, the most sophisticated passive detection systems humanity had ever built, capable of resolving objects at ranges that the Keth wouldn't believe possible, found the occupation fleet. 40 warships, high orbit above Velhari Prime with smaller patrol clusters above 2 moons and the outer colony. Standard Dominion formation, aggressive, clustered, designed for intimidation of enemies who couldn't fight back. Sci-Fi studied the disposition for 4 hours. She compared it against every combat scenario her tactical AI had modeled. Then she called her command staff together and walked them through the engagement plan one final time. When she finished, she looked around the table at the people who had crossed the galaxy with her. "Questions?" Commander Tanaka spoke. "The 3 ships we're going to let escape, Admiral, you're certain?" "Yes," she didn't elaborate immediately. She let the room consider it. Then, "We're not just here for the Velhari. We're here to send a message to every other Keth target in this galaxy. 3 ships going home to tell the story does more long-term work than 40 destroyed hulks that no one ever hears about." There were nods around the table. The logic was clean. The mercy was strategic. Both things were true simultaneously, which was exactly how Admiral Sci-Fi preferred her decisions. "Then we're ready," she said. It wasn't a question. "We're ready," they answered. 2 days later, UEDS Relentless dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Velhari system, and 312 ships emerged from the dark behind her, perfectly spaced, perfectly coordinated, running every active sensor in maximum broadcast mode so that there would be absolutely no ambiguity about what had just arrived. Sensor Officer Vrakis had been eating his midday ration when the board lit up. He stared at it for 3 full seconds, an eternity in Sensor Officer terms, before his hands found the alert key. His station on the Keth Command Cruiser Dominions was state-of-the-art by Dominion standards, capable of detecting vessels at ranges up to 200,000 kilometers with precision. What the board was showing him now was at 340,000 kilometers. That shouldn't have been possible. He called his superior. His superior called the operations commander. The operations commander called Vrethsa. Occupation Commander Vrethsa was a tall Keth, nearly 3 meters of angular gray exoskeleton, 4 forward-facing eyes, a posture that communicated authority with biological efficiency. He had held this post for 7 months. 7 months of exactly what he'd expected, a primitive species with no meaningful resistance capability, a planet slowly being processed into Dominion assets, a career-appropriate assignment that would look solid on his advancement record. Not glorious. Solid. He looked at the sensor report. He read it 3 times. 312 vessels. Unknown configuration. Unknown registry. Massing at the system edge at 340,000 kilometers, already closer than his sensors should have caught them, which meant their stealth capability was beyond anything in his intelligence files. And they were still coming. Accelerating in perfect formation, not the chaotic spread of a panicking fleet, but the terrifyingly controlled advance of something that knew exactly what it was doing. Vrethsa did not feel fear, not yet. The Keth had a biological suppressor for fear, a useful evolutionary trait in a species built for conquest. What he felt was a deep, uncomfortable unfamiliarity. He did not know these ships. He did not know this configuration. In 30 years of Dominion service, he had never encountered a fleet he couldn't immediately classify. He sent identification queries on all standard frequencies. No response. He sent warnings on priority Dominion channels. No response. He was composing a full-spectrum scan order when the hailing frequency opened. The voice that came through was calm, unhurried. Female, he processed, though the concept was fuzzy across species. Speaking in perfect Dominion standard, accented but fully precise, every word deliberate, carrying the specific weight of someone who had chosen each one carefully. This is Fleet Admiral Yara Osai-Mensa of the United Earth Defense Command. You are in violation of galactic humanitarian norms, Dominion Treaty prohibitions, and several principles we intend to make you aware of personally. You have 20 minutes to release the Velhari population, stand down your weapons systems, withdraw to minimum safe distance, and prepare to surrender your commanding officers for war crimes tribunal proceedings. This offer will not be repeated. I want you to understand something clearly, Commander, before your 20 minutes begin. I am not bluffing. I have never bluffed in my professional life, and I see no reason to start today. A pause, then. Your time begins now. Silence on the bridge of Dominion's will. Vrethsaw's 4 eyes moved between the sensor display and his communications officer and back. 312 ships, unknown specification. An admiral who spoke his language without hesitation. 20 minutes. Who are these people? He asked. His intelligence officer pulled up the registry files. Cross-referenced again. Came back with an expression Vrethsaw had never seen on a Keth face before: genuine bewilderment. They're from a system called Sol, Commander, a planet called Earth. A pause. They're classified as Category 0. The bridge went very quiet. Category 0, Vrethsaw repeated. Category 0, sir. Barely spacefaring at last assessment. No known military capacity of significance. Pre-FTL civilization as recently as. I can see 300 of their ships on my sensors. A longer pause. Yes, sir. Vrethsaw stood up. Category 0. A Category 0 species had arrived with 300 warships in perfect military formation with an admiral who had the voice of someone who had won wars before and found the whole business somewhat tiresome. He looked at his communication officer. Get me a channel to all fleet vessels, battle stations. We will treat this as a demonstration. They are attempting intimidation. Categories do not reclassify themselves. His voice carried conviction. Prepare full weapons complement. We will respond to their bluff with our own show of force, and then they will stand down. His tactical officer pulled up the combat assessment, looked at it again. Commander, even at Category 0 specifications, 300 vessels against our 40. They are Category 0, Vrethsaw said firmly. Stand by weapons. 14 minutes into the 20-minute window, the Keth fleet brought weapons online. 12 minutes into the 20-minute window, Admiral Osai-Mensa watched the power readings on her tactical display shift into offensive configuration across the Keth formation. She turned to Commander Tanaka. He met her eyes. No words were necessary. She looked at the countdown on her screen. 8 minutes remaining on the offer she had made. She had always known they wouldn't take it. Some species had to learn certain things the hard way. It was not her preferred outcome. But she had prepared for it thoroughly, professionally, and with the complete attention of 312 ships and 460,000 crew members who were about to demonstrate exactly what Category 0 looked like from the inside. She waited out the full 20 minutes anyway. Because she was a woman of her word. And because when history looked back at this moment, she intended it to be absolutely clear who had been given every possible chance. The Keth fired first. That detail mattered. Admiral Osai-Mensa had waited for it, not because she needed the moral clarity, she already had it, but because she wanted the record to be clean. When this was studied later by Earth historians, by galactic tribunals, by the Keth Dominion itself in its post-war inquiries, the opening shot would belong unambiguously to the occupation fleet. It would not be disputed. It would not be complicated. It would be simple. They fired first. The opening salvo was impressive by Dominion standards. 40 warships releasing their full offensive complement simultaneously, plasma lances, kinetic impactors, high-yield disruptor bursts spreading across a wide engagement front in the classic Keth intimidation formation. It was designed to make an enemy fleet scatter. Every enemy fleet the Keth had ever faced had scattered. It was reliable. It was tested. It had worked 47 times in recorded Dominion combat history. The Aegis Armada did not scatter. The point defense systems on the leading human vessels activated with a speed that the Keth sensors registered but could not immediately parse. The reaction time was below their expected threshold for any known species. Incoming ordnance was intercepted with a systematic efficiency that looked, to outside observers, almost contemptuous, not struggling to defend. Processing. The way a hand brushes aside a fly without the brain needing to fully engage. Then the Armada answered. Commander Tanaka's voice was calm and level as he called the engagement sequence. Hammer group primary targets, strike elements split and engage flanks, drone complement deploy full. The 8 Hammer-class dreadnoughts fired as one. There is a specific silence to a railgun in vacuum. No sound carries. No flash extends beyond the muzzle. From the outside, from a Keth sensor officer watching his display, what happened was that 3 Dominion cruisers ceased to exist between one reading and the next. No explosion he was prepared for. No visible beam. One moment, 3 ships. Next moment, debris field. The tungsten rods had traveled the intervening distance in 1.3 seconds. The Keth ships never saw them coming because nothing in Dominion combat experience had prepared their targeting systems to watch for something that fast, that small, and that absolutely lethal. The drone swarms came next. 800,000 autonomous combat drones poured from the Armada's carrier bays in a dark, spreading cloud that the Keth sensors rendered as a solid mass. Their resolution couldn't distinguish individual units at that density. The drones were not sophisticated weapons. They didn't need to be. Each one carried a simple shape charge warhead and a collision guidance system tuned to Keth hull signatures. They moved in coordinated swarms, overwhelming point defense systems through sheer numerical saturation. Not because any individual drone was dangerous, but because you cannot shoot 800,000 things. Not before a statistically certain number of them reach your hull. The Keth fleet's formation broke at the 4-minute mark. This was actually faster than Osai Mensa's most aggressive projection. Her tactical AI had modeled formation break at 6 to 9 minutes under optimal conditions. The Keth broke at 4 because something had happened that no combat model had fully accounted for. The Keth commanders were afraid. Their biological suppressor was failing them. They had engaged what they believed was a bluff, a demonstration, a Category 0 species making noise. And what they had found instead was a wall of steel and fire that did not slow, did not recalculate, did not show any of the hesitation that Dominion combat doctrine identified as the universal signal of an enemy at the edge of their capability. The Armada just kept coming. 3 Keth vessels broke formation and ran for the system edge. Admiral Osai Mensa identified them on her tactical display and marked them with a single command: do not pursue. They were the 3 she had already chosen. They would carry the story home. The rest of the Keth fleet, those still capable of maneuvering, found that every escape vector was already covered. The human fleet's positioning had not been coincidental. It had been calculated 17 days ago and adjusted with each new sensor read during the crossing. There was no hole in the net. The antimatter lances came into play for the larger Keth vessels, the ones with reinforced shielding, the command ships, the heavy cruisers that had taken the drone swarms and survived. Each lance was a sustained beam of antimatter-matter annihilation, converting a 10-centimeter column of whatever it struck into pure energy at the speed of light. The physics were elegant. The results were not. 2 Keth heavy cruisers lasted 90 seconds under sustained lance fire. Their shields, among the best the Dominion deployed, held for 60 of those seconds, which was, admittedly, better than Osai Mensa's models had predicted. She noted it for the after-action report. 22 minutes after the first shot, Commander Tanaka spoke. "Admiral, we're reading weapons offline signatures across the remaining Keth vessels. 17 ships are showing emergency transponder codes." "Emergency transponder, surrender signal." "All weapons to hold," she said, instantly. No hesitation, no savoring. The order went fleet-wide in 0.3 seconds and was complied with in 0.8. "Hailing all Keth vessels, this is Admiral Osai Mensa. Weapons offline and confirmed. Prepare for boarding teams. Any vessel that reactivates weapons will be destroyed. Any vessel that complies will be treated with full respect under military prisoner protocols. You have my word." She turned from the tactical display and looked at the planet below. Velhari Prime. From orbit it was the color of a bruise, deep violet and blue-green, beautiful even through the sensor rendering. Somewhere down there, an elder named Thesivin was still waiting to find out if anyone had heard her. Communications. Osai Mensa's voice shifted, something almost imperceptible, a softening at the edges. Get me a frequency to the Velhari surface, broadband all channels. The communications officer worked for 90 seconds. Admiral, we're picking up a transmission from underground. They've been broadcasting continuously. Patch it through to my earpiece. She heard it then, the harmonic layering Dr. Sato had described. Not words, not in any language she spoke, but something that every human instinct she possessed translated without effort. We are still here. We are still here. Is anyone listening? She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them, and she spoke into the broadband frequency. And Dr. Sato whispered the Velhari phonetics into her other ear so she could say the first 4 words in their language before continuing in Dominion Standard. Ethanvari Thesavin Veshariana. We heard you. This is Earth. We're here. You're safe now. I'm sorry it took us so long. The underground Velhari transmission stopped for 11 seconds. Then it changed. The harmonics shifted into something that Dr. Sato, listening from the Xenology suite, described in her official report as the acoustic equivalent of a species exhaling for the first time in a decade. She was not a person given to poetry, but that was the only language adequate to what she heard. On the planet's surface, in the underground sanctuaries where 2 billion Velhari had been living in enforced silence, bioluminescent skin lit up spontaneously, the involuntary Velhari response to profound emotion. Entire cavern systems bloomed with violet and gold light. Guards who had been stationed at sanctuary entrances saw it through their monitoring feeds and called their commanders. The commanders called Vrethsa. Vrethsa was already in custody. He had surrendered personally, 41 minutes after the battle began, aboard the relentless conference room, to a human marine named Sergeant Ajora Ikena, who was 5'4", and had looked at him with an expression of complete professional calm that he found more unsettling than anything that had happened in the last hour. She had handed him a data pad and said, "Your rights under UEDC military prisoner protocols, translated into Dominion Standard. Please read and confirm." He had stood there for a moment, 3 meters of Keth military authority, and had no framework for what was happening to him. No framework for a species that fought like this and then handed you a rights document. He signed it. Above the planet, the boarding operations proceeded with methodical care. Human marines in combat armor, calm, trained, professional, moved through Keth vessels that had fully stood down. No incidents, no violations. The UEDC had protocols for this too. Of course it did. By hour 6, it was over. 19 Keth vessels destroyed, 18 captured, 3 released to carry the story. 0 civilian casualties on Velhari Prime. The Keth occupation infrastructure, the mining rigs, the detention facilities, the processing centers, was intact, documented, and sealed for tribunal evidence. Admiral Osai Mensa wrote her preliminary after-action report in 40 minutes. At the bottom, under additional notes, she typed 1 line. The Velhari sang when we told them we were here. I think we should remember that. What it means to be the species that shows up. The 3 Keth ships that Admiral Osai Mensa had deliberately allowed to escape arrived at Dominion Central Command in the Keth home system 17 days later. They were expected. The Dominion High Command had been tracking their emergency transponder codes since the ships cleared the Velhari system. What was not expected was the condition of the crews aboard those vessels. Keth military personnel were trained for adversity. They were selected, conditioned, and professionally hardened against psychological disruption. That was a core Dominion military principle. Emotion is a variable, and variables are liabilities. The crews of those 3 ships could not file their reports verbally. Every single officer who attempted to give a spoken account broke down before completing a sentence. Not from injury, not from physical trauma. From something the Dominion Medical Corps spent 3 weeks trying to classify before quietly settling on a term borrowed from a captured Velhari psychological text: moral vertigo. The complete destabilization of one's understanding of how the world is ordered. They had believed certain things. The strong dominate. Categories are accurate. The universe operates on a clear hierarchy, and position in that hierarchy is determined by capability and will. These were not opinions. They were structural assumptions baked into Keth civilization over millennia. In 4 hours above Velhari Prime, a Category 0 species had disassembled every one of them. The High Council reviewed the gun camera footage in a sealed chamber, all 7 council members. The session was scheduled for 2 hours. It ran for 9. They watched the Aegis Armada drop out of FTL in formation. They watched 312 vessels maintain perfect cohesion during a coordinated multi-axis engagement against an experienced Dominion fleet. They watched the railgun strikes, and the silence of them, the terrible, sourceless silence of ships simply ceasing to exist without theatrical explosion or energy signature, with the specific nausea of people seeing something for the first time that they cannot unfeel. They watched the drone swarms. They watched the antimatter lances. Then they watched Admiral Osimensa's boarding operation. Clean, professional, prisoner protocols followed to the letter. Not one atrocity, not one reprisal, not one moment of cruelty that they could point to and use to place the humans in a category they understood. Council member Vrethka, eldest of the 7, who had served through 4 different military campaigns, spoke first when the footage ended. Her voice was very quiet. We classified them as Category 0. No one responded. The statement didn't require a response. Category 0, pre-military civilization, no significant threat index, low priority, she paused. Who made that assessment? The intelligence director was present in an advisory capacity. He said nothing. There was nothing useful he could say. They were building that fleet 30 years ago, said Council Member Thalve. He had been reviewing the intelligence files during the screening. Our last updated assessment of their system was 42 years ago. 42 years. We looked at them once, put them in a box, and never looked again. Because they were Category 0, Vrethka said. Because we decided they were Category 0, Thalve corrected. We decided it, we labeled it, and then we used the label instead of looking at the actual species. That distinction between the label and the truth would become the defining phrase of the Dominion's formal inquiry into the Battle of Velhari Prime. It would appear in the inquiry's final report 247 times. But that was later. Right now, in this sealed chamber, 7 Keth leaders were confronting something more immediate. A species they had dismissed utterly had just demonstrated not only that they could fight a Dominion fleet to decisive conclusion, but that they had chosen, deliberately chosen, to leave survivors, to release prisoners under a rights protocol, to contact the liberated population in their own language, to send a message that was not triumphalist or threatening, but something far more unsettling. Because at the end of the gun camera footage, tagged separately by the intelligence team, was Admiral Osimensa's final broadband transmission, the one she had sent after the battle, not to the Keth, to everyone. Every frequency, every channel, translated into 47 languages by whatever communication technology she had aboard. And the breadth of languages available told the Council something else about humanity that they had not expected, which was that these people had been listening to the galaxy for a very long time. This is Admiral Yara Osimensa of the United Earth Defense Command. What happened in the Velhari system today was not a war. It was a rescue. We came because someone called for help, and we believe that's a sufficient reason to cross any distance and face any opposition. We are returning to Earth. The Velhari are free and will be rebuilding with our assistance. The Keth officers responsible for occupation crimes will face tribunal proceedings under UEDC and Velhari joint jurisdiction. A pause, then the line that the Council played 3 times in a row, in complete silence. To every species in this galaxy who has been told that no one is coming for you, update your records. Earth's frequency is open. It will always be open. If you call us, we will answer. We will come. That is not a threat, and it is not a promise we make lightly. It is simply who we are. It is what we choose to be. The sealed chamber was very quiet for a very long time. Then Council Member Vrethka did something no one present had ever seen a High Council member do. She pulled up the category classification database. The full registry, every species the Dominion had ever encountered, ranked from 5 to 0. She found Earth. Read the full entry. Read the last updated date, 42 years ago. She deleted the category field. Left it blank. We will need a new classification, she said. We don't appear to have one that fits. Across the galaxy, the transmission propagated at the speed of light, and then, through subspace relays and intercepted frequencies, and the kind of informal alien internet that exists wherever sentient species cluster near each other's comm networks, it spread faster than light. On Thurev Station, a small administrative outpost at the edge of Syndicate space, a species called the M. Heron, gray, quiet, perpetually overlooked, picked up the transmission on a second-hand receiver. The Heron had been under informal syndicate economic coercion for 60 years. Not quite occupation, not quite war. The particular, grinding, plausibly deniable kind of domination that never rises to the level anyone formally protests. They had no allies. They had sent 3 formal requests for intervention to the Galactic Convocation and received 3 politely worded non-responses. The Heron station administrator listened to Admiral Osimensa's transmission 4 times. Then she opened a long-range communication array and began composing a message. It took her 40 minutes to write. She checked the frequency the Admiral had specified. She pressed send. On a water world called Velsoren, the Pelagian Deep City Councils had been secretly broadcasting their coordinates for 20 years, hoping someone with the willingness to notice would find them. They found Earth's frequency in the transmission header. They had a council vote within 6 hours. The vote was unanimous. On a dozen other worlds, small worlds, overlooked worlds, worlds the galactic powers had long ago placed in their own versions of Category 0. The transmission arrived and was heard and was discussed in the hushed, careful way that people discuss things they want desperately to believe but are afraid to. And slowly, in the weeks and months that followed, Earth's long-range communication arrays began to receive answers. Not all from species in crisis. Some were simply, hello. We heard you, we wanted you to know we exist, we wanted to know if you were real. Admiral Osimensa returned to Earth on a Thursday. Apparently the universe was beginning to favor Thursdays, to a reception that she found embarrassing in its scale, and accepted with the composed grace of someone who knew that the attention was not really for her. It was for the idea, for the thing humans had decided they wanted to be. She gave one public address. It was not long. We went because someone called. We'll go again if someone calls again. That's not heroism, that's a decision. And decisions are the only things any of us actually control. She paused. Make good ones. Then she went back to work. Because somewhere out there, Earth's frequency was open. And the calls were already coming in.